The morning Rowan Mercer found the body, the sun hadn't yet burned the frost off the sage. He'd ridden out before dawn from Silver Ridge, his ranch, though calling it a ranch was like calling the ocean a pond. 30,000 acres of prime grazing land stretched across 3 valleys, watered by streams that never ran dry even in August. He owned freight contracts from here to the territorial capital, had his money in railways and timber, and his name on deeds for properties he'd never seen. At 42, Rowan Mercer was the kind of wealthy that didn't need to announce itself. People just knew. But wealth was a strange thing out here on the frontier. It bought comfort, sure. Protection, sometimes. Respect from men who measured worth in cattle and coin. But it didn't buy peace. Rowan had learned that the hard way. He was heading to Farrell's outpost, a squat trading post tucked against the foothills where the road split toward the mining camps. He'd commissioned a custom rifle 3 months back, a Winchester with silver inlay and his initials on the stock, the kind of thing a man bought when he had money to burn and nothing better to spend it on. Farrell was supposed to have it ready, along with winter supplies for the ranch, routine business, the kind of errand Rowan could have sent his foreman to handle, but he liked the ride, liked the silence. The outpost came into view just as the light turned gold. Single-story building, log construction, roof patched with tar paper. Corral out front, empty. No smoke from the chimney. Rowan frowned. Farrell always had a fire going this time of year. He tied his horse to the rail and stood there a moment, listening. Nothing. No movement inside. No sound except the wind scraping across the hills. The door was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. Farrell locked up at night, always. Had ever since drifters stole half his inventory 2 winters back. Rowan pushed the door open. Farrell? The smell hit him immediately. Copper and rot. His hand went to the revolver at his hip before his mind caught up to what he was seeing. The store had been torn apart. Shelves overturned, goods scattered across the floor. Sacks of grain split open, flour dusting everything like snow. And in the center of it all, face down in a pool of black blood, was Farrell himself. Rowan crossed the room slowly, boots crunching on broken glass. He didn't need to check for a pulse. Farrell's throat had been opened ear to ear, the cut so deep it looked like someone had tried to take his head off. His hands were frozen in claws, fingers broken. Whoever did this had made him suffer first. Jesus, Rowan breathed. His stomach turned, but he didn't look away. You didn't survive long out here by being squeamish. Then he heard it, a sound from the back room. Faint. Could have been wind rattling a loose board, but it wasn't. It was breathing, labored and wet. Rowan's hand tightened on his gun. He stepped around Farrell's body, moving toward the door to the back storeroom. It was locked, but the wood around the latch was splintered, like someone had forced it shut from the outside. Anyone in there? The breathing stopped, then a voice. Barely a whisper. Stay away. A woman's voice. Rowan holstered his gun and pulled his knife. 3 hard kicks, and the door gave way, hinges tearing free from wood gone soft with age. The storeroom was dark, just one high window letting in a sliver of light. The air was thick with the smell of blood and something else, burned flesh. It took Rowan's eyes a moment to adjust, and when they did, he almost wished they hadn't. She was slumped against the far wall, half hidden behind crates of ammunition. Young, maybe mid-20s, dressed in what used to be a riding outfit now torn to rags. Her face was swollen, one eye sealed shut, lips split and crusted with dried blood. But it was her shoulder that made Rowan's breath catch. Someone had branded her. The mark was still raw, blistered, and weeping. A circle with 2 crossed lines through it. Rowan recognized it immediately. Everyone in the territory did. The black hollow mark. Don't, she said again, trying to push herself upright and failing. Don't, they'll come back. Rowan crossed the room and knelt beside her. Up close he could see more damage. Her hands were rope burned, wrists rubbed raw, bruises on her throat, boot prints on her ribs. This hadn't been quick. They'd taken their time. They're gone, Rowan said, keeping his voice low and steady. It's just me. My name's Rowan Mercer. I'm going to get you out of here. She stared at him with her one good eye, and for a moment he thought she might try to fight. But then something in her face crumpled, and she nodded once. Celine, she whispered. My name is Celine Voss. Getting Celine onto his horse was harder than it should have been. She was thin, too thin, like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. But every movement made her gasp or bite back a scream. Broken ribs, Rowan guessed. Maybe worse. He'd seen men kicked by horses who looked better than she did. He didn't take her back to town. Couldn't. The nearest doctor was in Briar's End, 12 miles south, and Briar's End was Black Hollow territory. The sheriff there, Marshal Cole Draven, was on their payroll. Everyone knew it, even if no one said it out loud. Taking Celine there would be like handing her back to whoever did this. Instead, Rowan rode north, toward Silver Ridge. He had a woman on staff, Clara Hayes, who'd worked as a nurse during the war. If anyone could patch Celine up without asking too many questions, it was Clara. The ride took 3 hours. Celine didn't speak, just clung to the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands and breathed through her teeth. Rowan kept one arm around her, steadying her when she swayed. Twice she passed out, and he had to stop to make sure she was still breathing. By the time they reached Silver Ridge, the sun was high and hot. The ranch spread out below them like something from a painting. Main house built from imported stone, barns and bunkhouses arranged in neat rows, corrals holding more horses than most towns had residents. It was beautiful. Rowan barely noticed anymore. He rode straight to the main house and shouted for Clara before he'd even dismounted. She came running from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and stopped dead when she saw what he was carrying. "Mother of mercy," Clara breathed. "What happened?" "Black Hollow," Rowan said. He slid down from the saddle and caught Celine as she started to fall. "Get the guest room ready. And Clara, no one else knows about this. Not the hands, not the foreman, no one." Clara's face hardened. She was 50-something, gray-haired and steel-spined, and she'd seen enough ugliness in her life that nothing much surprised her anymore. "Bring her inside." Bonk. Celine woke to clean sheets and the smell of carbolic soap. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the pain hit, sharp and total, like someone had filled her veins with broken glass, and it all came rushing back. The outpost. Grady's hands on her throat. The brand burning into her skin while Silas watched and smiled. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. A woman's voice, calm and firm, said, "Don't." Celine froze. The woman was sitting in a chair beside the bed, lamplight throwing shadows across her lined face. She was holding a bowl of water and a cloth, and her eyes were the kind that had seen too much to be easily shocked. "You're safe," the woman said. "Name's Clara. You're at Silver Ridge Ranch. Mr. Mercer brought you here 2 days ago." 2 days. Celine's throat was dry as sand. "Where is he?" "Downstairs. He'll want to know you're awake." Clara set the bowl aside and leaned forward. "But first I need to check your wounds. That brand's infected. I've been cleaning it, but it needs watching." Celine looked down at her shoulder. Someone had bandaged it, neat and tight. The pain was still there, but duller now, like it had been pushed back behind a wall of laudanum. "The man who brought me here," Celine said slowly. "Rowan Mercer." "Who is he?" Clara's mouth twitched. "You really don't know?" "Should I?" "He's the richest man in 3 territories. Owns more land than some states. If you'd asked me a week ago whether Rowan Mercer would risk his neck pulling a Black Hollow victim out of a crime scene, I'd have said you were dreaming." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "But here we are, I'll fetch him." She left before Celine could ask anything else. Celine lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. The room was fine, too fine. Wallpaper with little flowers, oil paintings on the walls, a rug that probably cost more than her father's farm. The kind of place where people like her didn't belong. Footsteps on the stairs. Then the door opened, and Rowan Mercer walked in. He looked different than she remembered. Cleaner, for one thing. Someone had clearly made him wash up after carrying her blood-soaked body across half the territory. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair starting to gray at the temples, and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully blank. He wore a vest and shirt sleeves, no jacket, and his hands were scarred in the way that said he'd worked for his fortune before he got rich enough to hire people to work for him. "Miss Voss," he said, and his voice was the same as she remembered, low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't waste words. "How are you feeling?" Celine almost laughed. It came out as a cough instead. "Like I got dragged behind a horse for 10 miles, but alive." "Thank you." Rowan pulled the chair closer and sat. "You don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same." "No," Celine said. They wouldn't have. Not when Black Hollow's involved. Something flickered across Rowan's face. Tell me what happened. So she did. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. How she'd been traveling with her brother, headed for the mining camps where he'd heard there was work. How they'd stopped in Briar's End for supplies and made the mistake of crossing paths with Boone Rayner in a saloon. How her brother had defended her when Boone got handsy, and how Boone had smiled and said, "I'll remember that." 3 days later, men in black dusters rode into their camp at night, dragged her brother off his horse, and beat him until he couldn't stand. Then they took him. Celine tried to follow, tried to fight, and woke up in chains in a basement that smelled like old blood. They kept me there for 2 weeks, Celine said. Her voice was flat, mechanical. Grady Pike. He's their enforcer. He wanted to break me, make me compliant. That's what he called it, compliant. She touched the bandage on her shoulder. This was supposed to remind me who I belonged to. Rowan's face had gone very still. And your brother? Celine closed her eyes. They killed him. Slowly. Silas Rayner, he's Boone's older brother, runs the whole operation. He made me watch. Said it was a lesson. The room was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. Why'd they leave you alive? Rowan asked finally. I don't know. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they figured I'd run and they could hunt me down later. Celine opened her eyes. Or maybe they just wanted me to suffer longer. Rowan stood and walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at his land, his empire, all that money and power spread out under the sky. The Black Hollow Syndicate, he said quietly, has been operating in this territory for 8 years. They started small, protection rackets, claim jumping, the usual outlaw business. But then they got smart, started buying people, lawmen, judges, freight companies. Now they move women and children like cattle, smuggle goods through legitimate channels, and no one can touch them because half the territory's in their pocket. He turned back to face her. I've been trying to bring them down for 3 years, ever since they killed my wife. Celine stared at him. Your wife? Emily. Rowan's voice didn't change, but his hands clenched at his sides. She was running a charity, helping women who'd been trafficked, trying to get them to safety. She uncovered a route the syndicate was using, hidden compartments in freight cars disguised as livestock shipments. She brought the evidence to Marshal Draven, thinking he'd help. His jaw tightened. He went straight to Silas. They found her body 3 days later in a ravine, made it look like a riding accident. I'm sorry, Celine said, and meant it. Rowan shook his head. After she died, I tried everything, hired investigators, private detectives, even contacted the territorial governor. Nothing worked. The syndicate's reach is too deep. I could buy 100 men, but I can't buy justice. Not when the system itself is rotten. He moved back to the chair and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Miss Voss, Celine, I didn't just bring you here out of charity. I brought you here because you've seen the inside of their operation. You know their faces, their routines, where they keep their prisoners. That's worth more than all my money combined. Celine's heart was pounding. What are you saying? I'm saying I can protect you. I can give you a safe place to heal, resources, anything you need. But in return, he paused. In return, I want to burn them down. All of them. And I need your help to do it. Celine looked at him for a long time. This man with his fine house and his imported wallpaper, his land and his money, and his empty bed where a good woman used to sleep. He was offering her a deal. Revenge wrapped in the language of mutual benefit. Smart, but also dangerous. The Black Hollow Syndicate didn't forgive, and they didn't forget. Going after them meant all or nothing. It meant blood. But then Celine's hands were already stained. I want Silas Rayner dead, she said, and Boone and Grady Pike. I want them to suffer the way my brother suffered, the way I suffered. Then we're agreed, Rowan said. Not yet. Celine pushed herself upright, ignoring the pain screaming through her ribs. I need to know something first. Why do you really care? You could take your money and leave. Go somewhere civilized, somewhere safe. Why stay here and fight a war you can't win? Rowan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw in a way it hadn't been before. Because Emily asked me to. The night before she died, she came home and said, Rowan, if something happens to me, don't let them win. Don't let them keep doing this. I promised her I wouldn't. He met Celine's eyes. I've broken a lot of promises in my life, but not that one. Never that one. Celine nodded slowly. All right, then here's the deal. You give me everything I need, guns, supplies, information, a place to plan, and when the time comes, you don't get in my way. I'm not your employee. I'm not your weapon. I'm a partner. Equal stakes. Rowan stood and extended his hand. Equal stakes. Celine took it. His grip was firm, callous despite the wealth. The grip of a man who'd built something before he got rich enough to pay others to build for him. One more thing, Celine said. I'm going to kill them, not capture. Not turn them over to some bought-off marshal. Kill. If that's a problem for you. It's not, Rowan said simply. And just like that, the war began. Geez. Over the next 2 weeks, Celine healed. Slowly, painfully, but she healed. Clara changed her bandages every day, cleaned the brand until the infection receded and scar tissue started to form. The mark would never go away. Celine knew that. She'd carry Silas Rayner's signature on her skin for the rest of her life. But that was fine. Let it be a reminder. Let it be fuel. Rowan gave her the guest room and told the ranch hands she was a distant cousin recovering from illness. No one questioned it. When you worked for Rowan Mercer, you learned not to ask questions. In the evenings, after Clara had gone home and the ranch settled into quiet, Rowan and Celine sat in his study and planned. The study was a strange room. One wall was lined with books, real books, leather-bound and expensive, the kind most people out here had never seen. Another wall held maps, dozens of them, showing freight routes and mining claims and water rights. A third wall was bare except for a single photograph in a silver frame. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Celine's family had earned in a year. Emily Mercer, the wife, the promise. Tell me about the ranch, Rowan said on the third night. He'd brought whiskey, 2 glasses, and a notebook. The Syndicate Ranch, where they took you. Celine closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. It's north of Briar's End, maybe 15 miles. Up in the hills where the pine starts to get thick. You wouldn't know it was there unless you were looking. Looks like any other cattle operation from the outside. Corrals, bunkhouse, main lodge. But underneath, she opened her eyes. Underneath there's a whole second level. Dug into the hillside, that's where they keep the prisoners. That's where they took my brother. Rowan was writing, his pen scratching across paper. How many men? I counted maybe 20 when I was there, but they rotate. Some are just ranch hands, don't know what's happening below. Others, she shuddered, others are true believers. Grady's crew, they enjoy the work. Guards? 2 at the main entrance, 1 at the tunnel that leads down to the cells. More during transport days. Transport days? Celine nodded. Every 2 weeks they move the prisoners. Load them into freight wagons disguised as supply runs, take them to the train depot in Coldwater Junction. From there, they're shipped east. I don't know where exactly. Silas never said. Rowan's pen stopped moving. Coldwater Junction, that's part of your freight network, Celine finished. I know. I heard them talking. They use your wagons, your contracts. You're the cover without even knowing it. Rowan's face went white, then red. For a moment, Celine thought he might throw the glass in his hand. Instead, he set it down very carefully and stood. How long has this been happening? I don't know, since before I got there. Rowan walked to the window. Outside, stars were coming out over the valley, beautiful and cold and infinite. I've been funding them, he said quietly. All this time. Every freight contract I sign, every wagon that rolls out with my name on it, I've been helping them. He turned. Did Emily know? I don't know, Celine said honestly. Maybe. If she was investigating them, she might have figured it out. Rowan's hands were shaking. Celine had never seen a man look so furious and so broken at the same time. We end this, he said. Whatever it takes. I don't care if I lose every contract, every dollar. We end this. Good, Celine said. Because I'm not stopping until they're all dead. 3 days later, a man arrived at Silver Ridge. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was a scarred, one-eyed blacksmith who'd lost his daughter to the Syndicate 2 years ago. Rowan had tracked him down through old contacts, promising nothing except a chance at revenge. Marcus took one look at Celine's brand and said, When do we start? 2 days after that, A woman named Iris Chandler showed up. She was 40-something, lean as a rail, with hands that were missing 2 fingers and eyes that never quite stopped moving. She'd been an explosives expert for the Union Army during the war, before her husband got caught stealing syndicate opium and they crucified him on his own barn door. She'd been running ever since. "Heard you're looking to blow something up," she said to Rowan. "Several things," Rowan replied. Iris grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. "Then I'm in." After that, they came in ones and twos, a drifter named Cole who'd watched the syndicate burn his farm for being on land they wanted. A former ranch hand named Beatrice, who'd been sold to Silas Rayner at 15 and escaped at 19 with knife scars and a hatred that could melt iron. A Paiute tracker named Tall Grass, who refused to explain why he wanted the syndicate dead, but whose skill with a rifle spoke for itself. They weren't soldiers, they weren't heroes, they were survivors. The discarded and the forgotten, people who'd been chewed up by the syndicate machine and spat out to die. But they hadn't died, and now they wanted blood. Rowan gave them what they needed: weapons from his armory, horses from his stables, a bunkhouse far from the main ranch where they could plan without being seen, money, not much, but enough, food, shelter, purpose. "You're building an army," Clara said one morning, watching through the kitchen window as Marcus and Cole practiced with rifles in the south pasture. "I'm building a reckoning," Rowan replied. Clara handed him coffee, strong and black. "You know this could destroy you, everything you've built. If people find out you're harboring fugitives, funding an attack on a—" She paused. "Well, on what most folks think is a legitimate business. Let them think what they want." Rowan sipped his coffee. "I'm done playing by rules written by cowards and criminals." Clara nodded. She didn't smile, but something in her face softened. Emily would be proud. Rowan didn't answer. He just watched his unlikely army train and thought about promises kept and blood owed. Chazek. 6 weeks after Rowan found her dying in Farrell's outpost, Celine stood in front of the mirror in the guest room and barely recognized herself. The swelling was gone. The bruises had faded to yellow and green. The brand on her shoulder had healed into a raised scar, the lines sharp and permanent. Clara had tried to tell her it would fade with time, but Celine knew better. Some marks didn't fade. She was stronger now, too. The first week she could barely walk without help. By the 4th week she was riding again. By the 6th, she could shoot better than half the men in Rowan's makeshift army. Revenge, it turned out, was excellent physical therapy. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Celine called. Rowan entered, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. "Thought you might want this." He set it on the bed and unwrapped it. Inside was a gun belt and a revolver. Not fancy, but well-maintained, the kind of weapon you could trust. And beneath that, a coat. Brown leather, worn at the elbows, with inside pockets and buttons made from bone. Celine's breath caught. "Where did you get this?" "Found it at Farrell's outpost when I went back to bury him. It was in the back room with you. I'm guessing it's your brother's." Celine picked up the coat with shaking hands. It still smelled like him. Tobacco and wood smoke and the cheap soap he used. She pressed it to her face, and for a moment she was back in their camp, watching him laugh at some stupid joke, his hands gesturing wildly as he talked about the life they were going to build. "Thank you," she whispered. Rowan nodded. "We're meeting tonight. Final planning session. If you're ready." "I'm ready," Celine said. She put on the coat. It fit perfectly, like armor. "Let's end this." Bummed. The bunkhouse was crowded that night, 11 people total, including Rowan and Celine. Not an army. Barely a militia. But it would have to be enough. Rowan had spread maps across the table, hand-drawn, annotated, showing every detail Celine could remember about the syndicate ranch, the main lodge, the bunkhouses, the corrals, and beneath it all, the tunnels. "The next transport is in 4 days," Rowan said. "They'll move the prisoners from the ranch to Coldwater Junction. That's when they're most vulnerable, when the goods are in transit, when their attention is split." "We hit the train," Iris said. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "Stop it before it leaves the territory." "We hit the ranch," Marcus countered. "Kill the head, the body dies." "We do both," Celine said. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, pointing to the map. "Iris is right. The train is where the prisoners are. If we let that train leave, those people are gone forever. But Marcus is also right. If we don't take out Silas and the leadership, they'll just rebuild. So we split up. Half our people hit the train, the other half hit the ranch. That spreads us thin, Cole said. We're already thin, Celine replied. But we're also unexpected. They think they're untouchable. That's our advantage. Rowan studied the map. It could work, but someone needs to get inside the ranch beforehand, sabotage their defenses, unlock the tunnels from the inside. I'll do it, Celine said. No, Rowan said immediately. They'll recognize you. Exactly. They'll recognize me, which means they won't shoot on sight. They'll want to recapture me, bring me back to Silas. That gives me time to get inside. It's suicide, Beatrice said flatly. Maybe, Celine agreed. But I know that place better than any of you. I know which guards are lazy, which doors stick where the ammunition is stored. If anyone can get in and out, it's me. Rowan's jaw was tight. If you get caught, then you finish it without me. Celine met his eyes. This is war, Rowan. People die in wars, but I didn't survive what I survived just to hide while someone else pulls the trigger. I'm going in. The room was silent. Then Marcus said, She's right. We need someone on the inside. I don't like it, Iris muttered, but she didn't argue. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue. Celine could see it in his face, the same expression he probably wore when Emily told him she was going to the marshal, the same helpless fury of watching someone you care about walk into danger. But in the end, he nodded. All right, you go in, but you don't go alone. I'll be in the hills with tall grass. The moment things go sideways, we cover your retreat. Deal, Celine said. They spent the next 3 hours hammering out details. Who would take the train? Who would hit the ranch? What signals to use? Where to regroup if everything went to hell? By the time they finished, it was past midnight. People drifted off to sleep, exhausted and wired. But Celine stayed, staring at the map, memorizing every line. She felt Rowan's presence before she heard him. He moved quietly for a big man. Can't sleep? He asked. Not yet. Celine traced the route from the ranch to Coldwater Junction. Rowan, if this doesn't work, if I don't make it out, don't, Rowan said. Don't talk like that. I have to. She turned to face him. If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something. My brother's buried somewhere on that ranch. In an unmarked grave, probably. If you get the chance, I'll find him, Rowan said, and I'll bury him properly. I promise. Celine nodded. Her throat was tight. Thank you. They stood there in the lamplight, two people bound by grief and fury, and a promise to burn the world down if that's what justice required. Why are you doing this? Celine asked suddenly. Really, Emily's gone. You could take your money and leave. Start over somewhere new. Why stay? Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because I failed her. I had all this money, all this power, and I couldn't save her, couldn't protect her. The only thing I can do now is make sure her death meant something. That's all that's left. It's not all, Celine said. You saved me. That counts. Rowan shook his head. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to stand. Then stand with me, Celine said, and let's finish this together. Rowan held out his hand. Celine took it, and in that moment, the deal was sealed. Not with contracts or lawyers or money changing hands, but with something older and truer. Blood for blood. Fire for fire. The reckoning was coming. The morning of the third day before the transport, Rowan rode into Briar's End alone. It was a calculated risk, the kind that made Clara nearly throw a frying pan at him when he announced his plans at breakfast. But Rowan had connections in town, legitimate ones, business associates who owed him favors and didn't ask inconvenient questions. If the syndicate was moving prisoners in 4 days, there'd be chatter. Freight manifests to review, wagons being loaded. Someone would know something. Briar's End sprawled along both sides of a muddy main street, buildings propped up more by habit than structural integrity. It was the kind of town that had sprung up around a silver strike 15 years back, boomed for 3 years, then settled into a slow decline when the easy ore ran out. What remained was a population of people too stubborn or too poor to leave, and enough saloons to keep them drunk enough not to care. The marshal's office sat at the north end of town, A squat brick building with bars on the windows and a flagpole out front that hadn't flown a flag in years. Rowan didn't go near it. Marshal Cole Draven was Black Hollow through and through, and walking into that office would be like announcing his intentions with a brass band. Instead, Rowan headed for the land office, a narrow building squeezed between a barber shop and a boarding house. Inside, a clerk named Wendell Gast sat behind a desk piled high with ledgers and survey maps. Wendell was 60, nearsighted, and had worked for the Territorial Land Office for 35 years. He also owed Rowan money from a bad investment in a timber contract that Rowan had graciously forgiven. Wendell looked up when the door opened, squinting through thick spectacles. Recognition dawned, followed immediately by nervousness. "Mr. Mercer," Wendell said, standing so quickly he knocked a stack of papers onto the floor. "I wasn't expecting, that is, I didn't know you were coming to town." "Relax, Wendell." Rowan closed the door behind him. "I'm not here to collect. I need information." Wendell's shoulders sagged with relief. "Of course. Anything. What do you need?" "Freight manifests, specifically wagons moving through Coldwater Junction in the next week. I want to know who's shipping, what they're carrying, and where it's going." Wendell's face went pale. "Mr. Mercer, those records are supposed to be confidential." "Wendell?" Rowan's voice didn't rise, but something in it made the clerk flinch. "I'm not asking for state secrets. I'm asking about shipping records for a junction that runs on my contracts and my money. Now, you can help me, or I can ride to the territorial capital and file a formal inquiry, which will take weeks and involve a lot of very public questions about how business is conducted in Briar's End." He paused. "Or you can spend 10 minutes pulling files, and we both walk away happy." Wendell swallowed hard. Then he nodded and disappeared into the back room. Rowan stood by the window, watching the street. Two cowboys staggered out of the Broken Spur Saloon, midday drunk. A woman in a faded dress swept the boardwalk in front of the general store. Normal life. People going about their business, unaware or uncaring that beneath the surface of this shabby town, children were being sold like livestock. Wendell returned carrying a leather folder stuffed with papers. "These are all the manifests filed for Coldwater Junction over the next 10 days. Mr. Mercer, if anyone finds out I showed you these, no one will find out," Rowan said. He took the folder and flipped it open. Most of it was mundane: timber shipments, mining equipment, agricultural supplies. Then, buried in the middle, he found it. A manifest dated 4 days from now, filed under the name Silver Pine Livestock Company. The cargo was listed as cattle and feed. The destination was Millbrook Station, 300 miles east. Silver Pine Livestock didn't exist. Rowan knew every legitimate outfit in the territory, and he'd never heard that name, which meant it was a shell, a paper company created just to move freight without raising questions. "This one," Rowan said, tapping the manifest. "Who filed it?" Wendell leaned over, squinting at the signature. "That would be... Oh, that's Harold Finch. He's a freight agent, works mostly for..." He stopped. "For who, Wendell?" Wendell's voice dropped to a whisper. "For the Rainer operation, up in the hills." Rowan's jaw tightened. "How many wagons?" "The manifest says 4, heavy load, based on the weight estimates." 4 wagons. Enough to hold 20, maybe 30 people if they were packed tight. Celine had said the syndicate moved prisoners every 2 weeks. This had to be it. "Thank you, Wendell." Rowan closed the folder and handed it back. "You've been very helpful. Mr. Mercer." Wendell's hands were shaking. "Please be careful. The Rainer brothers, they're not people you cross. I've seen what happens to folks who get in their way." "So have I," Rowan said. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Wendell, if anyone asks, I was never here. Understood?" Wendell nodded miserably. "Never here." Rowan stepped back onto the street and nearly walked straight into Marshal Cole Draven. The marshal was a big man, running to fat now in his 50s, with a handlebar mustache and a badge that caught the sunlight. He wore 2 guns, both well-maintained, and his eyes were the flat, empty eyes of a man who'd stopped caring about right and wrong a long time ago. "Rowan Mercer," Draven said, his voice thick with false warmth. "Long way from Silver Ridge. What brings you to our little town?" "Business," Rowan said evenly. "Reviewing some freight contracts." "Freight contracts." Draven's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny. I heard your contracts have been having some trouble lately, missing shipments, damaged goods. Real shame. I manage, Rowan said. Draven stepped closer, close enough that Rowan could smell the whiskey on his breath. You know, Rowan, you're a smart man, successful. It'd be a shame if something happened to disrupt all that success. Accidents happen out here on the frontier, even to rich men. Rowan held Draven's gaze. Is that a threat, Marshal? That's advice, Draven said, from someone who knows how things work around here. You stick to your ranch, your cattle, your money. Leave the law enforcement to me. Everyone stays happy. I'll keep that in mind, Rowan said. He pushed past Draven and walked back to his horse, every muscle in his body tight with the effort of not turning around and putting a bullet in the corrupt lawman's skull. But that would come later. Right now he had information, and information was worth more than revenge. He rode out of Briar's End without looking back. That night, Rowan gathered everyone in the bunkhouse and spread the manifest on the table. 4 wagons, he said. Silver Pine Livestock Company, which doesn't exist. Departing Coldwater Junction in 4 days, headed east to Millbrook Station. That's our target. Iris leaned forward, studying the route. Coldwater Junction's in the open. No cover, just flat grassland for miles. If we hit them there, we're exposed. We don't hit them at the junction, Selene said. She traced a line on the map with her finger. We hit them here. Broken Mesa Canyon. It's the only route from the junction to Millbrook that doesn't add 2 days to the journey. Narrow walls, plenty of cover, and only one way through. Marcus whistled low. A bottleneck. They'll be trapped. Exactly, Selene said. We set up on the ridge, wait for the wagons to enter the canyon, then block both ends. They'll have nowhere to run. What about the prisoners? Beatrice asked. If there's a fight, they're caught in the crossfire. That's why we move fast, Rowan said. The moment we have control, we open the wagons and get the prisoners to safety. No hesitation, no delays. Cole, the drifter, scratched his jaw. And what about the ranch? While we're hitting the canyon, Silas and his people are still up in the hills. That's my job, Selene said. I go in the night before the transport, create chaos, unlock the cells, sabotage their ammunition stores. By the time they realize what's happening, we're already gone. You'll need a diversion, Tallgrass said. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. Something to pull the guards away from the tunnels. Fire, Iris said immediately. I can rig something in the barn. Slow burn, give Selene time to get in position before it goes up. Rowan looked around the table. Everyone clear on their roles? Iris and Marcus take the canyon with 6 others. I stay with Tallgrass on overwatch for Selene. Once she's clear, we regroup and hit them from behind while they're dealing with the fire. And if things go wrong? Beatrice asked. Then we improvise, Selene said. But one way or another, this ends in 4 days. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Iris worked on her explosives, mixing powders and testing fuses in a shed far from the main buildings. Marcus and Cole rode out to scout Broken Mesa Canyon, mapping sight lines and ambush positions. Beatrice checked weapons, cleaned guns, sharpened knives until they could split hairs. Selene spent her time memorizing the plan, going over every detail until she could navigate the Syndicate ranch blindfolded. At night, she lay in the guest room and stared at the ceiling, her brother's coat draped over the chair like a ghost. On the morning of the 3rd day, Clara found her in the kitchen before dawn, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. Can't sleep? Clara asked. Haven't been able to for days, Selene admitted. Clara poured herself a coffee and sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Clara said, You don't have to do this, you know. You could leave. Rowan would understand. No, he wouldn't, Selene said, and neither would I. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe. Selene turned to look at the older woman. But I'm already dead if I run. You can't live with something like this inside you. It eats you from the inside out until there's nothing left but anger and shame. I need to finish it. Not for justice, not for revenge, just so I can breathe again. Clara's eyes were sad but understanding. Emily used to say something similar. I can't be happy in a world this broken. I have to at least try to fix my piece of it. That's what got her killed. I know, Selene said. But you're going anyway. I'm going anyway. Clara reached across the table and squeezed Selene's hand. Then come back alive. That house is too full of ghosts already. Late that afternoon, Rowan found Celine in the barn, checking her saddle for the third time. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, Celine said honestly. But that's good. Keeps you sharp. Rowan leaned against a post, arms crossed. He looked tired, Celine thought. Not physically, he was in better shape than most men half his age, but tired in the way people got when they'd been carrying something heavy for too long. I've been thinking about Emily, Rowan said suddenly, about the last conversation we had. She was packing a bag, getting ready to take evidence to the marshal. I told her it was too dangerous, that she should wait, let me handle it. She said, he stopped, his throat working. She said, Rowan, you're good at making money and building things, but you're not good at seeing people. I see them. I see what they need, what they're suffering, and I can't look away. She was right, Celine said. I know. Rowan's voice was rough. I spent 3 years trying to take down the syndicate from a distance, throwing money at the problem, hiring people, working through channels. It never occurred to me to just do it myself, to get my hands dirty. That's what she would have done. It's not too late, Celine said. Rowan met her eyes. Tomorrow night, when you go into that ranch, I want you to know that if something happens, if it goes wrong, I'm not leaving you behind. I don't care what we agreed. I'm not losing someone else to those animals. Celine felt something twist in her chest. Rowan, I mean it, Rowan said. You're not expendable. You're not a weapon I'm using. He stopped, searching for words. You're what Emily would have wanted me to protect. And I failed her, but I won't fail you. For a moment, Celine didn't know what to say. This man with all his money and power and grief looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth saving. Then don't get yourself killed trying to save me, Celine said finally, because I'm planning to walk out of there on my own 2 feet, and I'd prefer not to have your death on my conscience. Rowan smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but genuine. Deal. The night before the operation, Rowan couldn't sleep. He stood in his study looking at Emily's photograph. She smiled out at him from behind glass, frozen in a moment of happiness he could barely remember. They'd been married 7 years. Good years, mostly. She'd softened the rough edges he'd developed building his fortune, reminded him that money was a tool, not a purpose. I'm keeping my promise, he said to the photograph. I know you probably wouldn't approve of the methods. You always wanted to fix things the right way through the law, through proper channels. But those channels are poisoned, Emily, rotten from the inside. So I'm doing it your way, the way you actually did it, not the way you talked about it. I'm seeing people. I'm not looking away. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. Rowan poured himself whiskey, then poured it back. He needed to be sharp tomorrow, clear-headed, no mistakes. A knock at the door. Come in, he called. It was Celine, wearing her brother's coat and carrying a rifle. Can't sleep either? Seems to be going around, Rowan said. She crossed to the window and stood beside him. Outside, the ranch was dark except for lanterns in the bunkhouse where the others were doing final preparations. Tell me about her, Celine said. Emily? Not the saint everyone talks about, the real person. Rowan was surprised by the question, but maybe it was easier to talk about the dead the night before you might join them. She was stubborn, he said. Impossibly stubborn. Once she decided something was right, you couldn't budge her with dynamite. She grew up in Philadelphia, wealthy family, went to a real school, could have married some banker and spent her life going to parties and charity galas. Instead, she came west because she thought she could make a difference. Did she? Yes, Rowan said. She started a school for children whose parents worked the mines, taught them reading, writing, arithmetic. Then she started helping women who'd been trafficked, giving them shelter, helping them start over. The syndicate noticed, started putting pressure on her, trying to scare her off. She didn't scare. Sounds like someone I know, Celine said. Rowan glanced at her. You remind me of her sometimes. Not in looks, but in, he gestured vaguely, in the way you don't back down, the way you look at monsters and decide to fight them anyway. I'm not noble like she was, Celine said. I'm just angry. So was she, Rowan said. People think anger is a sin, but sometimes it's the only sane response to an insane world. Emily was furious. She just hid it better than most. They stood in silence for a while. Then Celine said, Rowan, If I don't make it out tomorrow, you will. But if I don't, Celine continued, I want you to know that this, she gestured around the study, the ranch beyond. This mattered. Having somewhere safe to heal, people who believed me, resources to fight back. Most people who survive what I survived never get that. They just disappear, forgotten. You gave me a chance to matter, to make their deaths mean something. So thank you. Rowan's throat was tight. You would have found a way regardless. People like you always do. Maybe, Celine said, but it would have been lonelier. She left before Rowan could respond, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Rowan turned back to Emily's photograph. She's going to get herself killed, he said quietly, just like you did. And I'm going to try to stop it, just like I did with you. The photograph smiled its unchanging smile. I know, Rowan said. I know I can't save everyone, but maybe I can save this one. Dawn broke cold and clear. Celine was already awake, dressed in dark clothes with her brother's coat over everything. She checked her guns twice, then a third time for good measure. Knife in her boot, extra ammunition in her pockets, a small tin of matches in case she needed them. The others gathered in the yard as the sun climbed. They looked nervous, which was good. Only fools went into battle confident. Rowan addressed them from the porch. You all know the plan. Iris, Marcus, Cole, Beatrice, you leave in 1 hour for Broken Mesa Canyon. Set up positions, wait for the wagons. Don't engage until they're fully in the trap. Tallgrass and I will shadow Celine, provide overwatch. Once the ranch is in chaos, we hit them from the outside while they're distracted. And if the transport doesn't come through, Marcus asked, then we regroup and try something else, Rowan said. But according to every source I have, those wagons are leaving Coldwater Junction tomorrow at dawn. They'll reach the canyon by midday. What if there are more guards than expected? Beatrice asked. Then you improvise, Celine said, stepping forward. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This is dangerous. People might die. But those wagons are full of prisoners, children, women, people who didn't ask for this. If we don't stop them now, they disappear forever. So whatever happens, we see this through. Nods around the circle. Grim faces, but determined. Iris raised a flask. To burning it down. To burning it down, the others echoed. They drank, passed the flask, then dispersed to prepare. Celine watched them go, these scarred survivors who'd agreed to risk everything for strangers. It was crazy, it was probably suicidal, but it was also the most human thing she'd ever been part of. Clara appeared at her elbow, holding a wrapped bundle. Food for the road, and this. She handed Celine a small derringer. 2 shots. Hide it somewhere they won't think to look. Celine tucked the derringer into her boot, opposite the knife. Thank you, Clara, for everything. Clara's eyes were wet. Come back alive, girl. I'm too old to lose any more people I care about. I'll try, Celine said. She mounted her horse. Rowan was already in the saddle, with Tallgrass beside him on a paint mare. They rode out together, the 3 of them, heading north toward the hills where the Syndicate Ranch waited. Gak. The ride took most of the day. They moved carefully, avoiding main roads and staying to the tree line where possible. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking the ranch. It looked exactly as Celine remembered. Main lodge made of timber and stone, smoke rising from the chimney, corrals holding horses, bunkhouse for the hands, barn, everything normal, unremarkable. You'd never know that beneath the surface, in tunnels carved into the hillside, people were locked in cages. How many guards? Tallgrass asked, his voice barely a whisper. Celine counted. 2 at the main gate, 1 by the barn. I see movement in the lodge windows, probably Silas or Boone. Can't tell how many are inside. The tunnel entrance, Rowan asked. Around back, hidden behind the storage shed. There should be 1 guard, maybe 2. They watched for another hour as the sun sank toward the horizon. Men moved in and out of the buildings, going about their evening routines. Lanterns were lit. Smoke from the cookhouse drifted across the yard. I need to move before dark, Celine said. Once they're settled in for dinner, attention gets sloppy. Rowan handed her a pocket watch. Iris will set the barn fire at midnight. That gives you 6 hours to get in, unlock the cells, and get to the rally point. We'll be watching. If you're not out by 1 in the morning, we come in after you. Don't, Celine said. If I'm not out, I'm dead or captured. Either way, you finish the mission. Hit the canyon, stop the transport. That's what matters. Celine, promise me, Rowan. Rowan's face was anguished, but finally he nodded. I promise. Celine checked her guns one last time, then started down the ridge on foot. Behind her, Rowan and Tallgrass faded into the trees, ghosts with rifles. The descent was steep and treacherous in the failing light. Celine moved slowly, testing each step, careful not to dislodge rocks that would clatter and give her away. By the time she reached the tree line behind the ranch, full dark had fallen. She crouched behind a deadfall and watched. The guard at the tunnel entrance was smoking, his rifle propped against the shed. Young, maybe early 20s. Celine didn't recognize him, which meant he was new. That was good. New guards were less alert. She waited until he turned away to flick his cigarette into the dirt. Then she moved. 3 quick steps, silent as breath. Her knife came out smoothly. She grabbed him from behind, one hand over his mouth, the blade finding the soft space between his ribs. He struggled for a moment, then went limp. Celine lowered him to the ground, her heart hammering. First blood. It never got easier, no matter how justified. She dragged the body behind the shed and took his keys. Then she approached the tunnel entrance, a heavy wooden door set into the hillside and secured with a padlock. The key fit. The lock opened with a soft click. Celine pulled the door open and stepped into darkness. The tunnel smelled like damp earth and fear. Celine lit a small candle from her pocket, just enough light to see by. The passage sloped downward, walls shored up with timber beams. Her footsteps echoed softly. After 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a larger space. Celine's candlelight revealed what she'd been expecting and dreading: cells. 6 of them, iron bars set into stone, each one holding people. They looked up as she approached, faces gaunt and hollow. A woman holding a child, 2 teenage boys, an older man with a bandaged leg, others in the shadows, too scared or too broken to move. I'm here to get you out, Celine whispered, but I need you to stay quiet. Can you do that? The woman with the child nodded. The others followed suit. Celine tried the guard's keys on the first cell. The lock was stiff, rusted. She had to put her weight into it before it finally turned. The door swung open with a groan that sounded like a scream in the enclosed space. Go, Celine hissed. Up the tunnel, into the trees, follow the ridge north. There are people waiting to help you. The woman clutched her child and ran. The others followed, moving like ghosts. Celine moved to the second cell. This one opened easier. 4 more prisoners fled into the night. She was working on the 3rd lock when she heard footsteps above. Heavy boots on wooden planks. Voices. Check the tunnel. Thought I heard something. Celine's blood turned to ice. She blew out her candle and pressed herself against the wall, knife in one hand, gun in the other. The footsteps came closer. Light spilled down the tunnel entrance. Then a voice, loud and irritated. Marcus, you down there? You were supposed to check in an hour ago. Celine held her breath. The guard she'd killed was named Marcus. They were looking for him. Silence. Then, probably drunk again. Go find him. I'll check the cells. Footsteps descending, a lantern's glow growing brighter. Celine waited until he was 3 steps into the chamber. Then she moved. She came out of the darkness like fury itself, knife leading. The guard saw her and tried to bring his rifle up, but she was faster. Her blade opened his throat. Hot blood sprayed across her face. He fell, gurgling, and didn't get up, but his lantern crashed to the ground, glass shattering, oil spreading. Flames licked across the floor. Damn it, Celine breathed. Damn it, Celine did. She ran to the remaining cells, keys slipping in her bloody hands. The locks fought her. The fire was spreading, catching on old timber. Come on, she muttered. Finally, the last lock opened. 6 more prisoners stumbled out, coughing in the smoke. Go, Celine shouted, abandoning stealth. Run! They ran. Celine followed, the tunnel filling with smoke behind her. She burst out into the night air, gasping, and immediately heard shouts from the ranch. They knew. The fire, the bodies, the open cells. They knew. Celine ran for the trees, bullets kicking up dirt behind her. She heard Rowan's rifle crack from the ridge, saw a man fall. Then Tallgrass fired, and another guard went down. She hit the tree line and kept running, branches tearing at her face. Behind her, the ranch was chaos. Men shouting, lanterns swinging, more gunfire. Celine ran until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like they'd collapse. Then she stumbled into a small clearing and found Rowan waiting with the horses. "Get on," he said, voice tight. She mounted. They rode hard through the darkness, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the rally point, a hidden canyon 2 miles north. The freed prisoners were there, huddled around a small fire that tall grass must have built. They looked terrified but alive. Celine dismounted on shaking legs and nearly collapsed. Rowan caught her. "You did it," he said. "Barely," Celine gasped. "They know. They'll be looking for us." "Let them look," Rowan said. "By tomorrow we'll have hit the canyon. Even if they come after us, it'll be too late." Celine nodded, too exhausted to argue. Clara's flask was in her hand suddenly, and she drank deep, the whiskey burning away the taste of smoke and blood. Around the fire, the freed prisoners watched her with something like awe. She'd saved them. She'd walked into hell and brought them out. But all Celine could think about was the 2 men she'd killed, their blood still drying on her hands, the way they'd looked at her in that last moment, surprised that death had come from someone so small. She told Rowan once that she was already dead inside, but that wasn't quite true. Part of her was still alive, still feeling, and that part screamed every time she took a life, even when it was necessary. Rowan sat down beside her, his presence solid and warm. "You all right?" "No," Celine said honestly, "but I will be. Once this is over." "Once this is over," Rowan repeated. It sounded like a promise, like something they were both holding on to, keeping them moving forward through the blood and smoke. The night stretched on. Somewhere in the hills behind them, the syndicate was mobilizing. And tomorrow, in a canyon far to the south, a freight train full of prisoners would roll into an ambush. The war was coming to a head, and there would be no going back. Morning came too fast and brought no comfort with it. Celine woke before dawn with her back against a rock and her brother's coat pulled tight around her shoulders. The freed prisoners huddled near the dying fire, sleeping in exhausted heaps. Rowan sat watch near the canyon entrance, rifle across his knees, staring out at the gray pre-dawn light, like he could see through the hills to whatever was coming. Celine stood, joints protesting, and walked over to him. "Any movement?" "Nothing yet," Rowan said. His voice was rough from lack of sleep. "But they'll come. Once Silas finds those empty cells and 2 dead guards, he'll know exactly what happened." "How long do we have?" "Hours, maybe. They'll need time to organize, figure out which direction we went. But not much time." He glanced at her. "You should eat something. It's going to be a long day." Celine wasn't hungry, but she forced down some dried meat and hardtack from Clara's provisions. Food was fuel, and she'd need every bit of strength before this was over. Around them, the prisoners began to stir, waking to a reality that was only marginally better than captivity. They were free, but hunted. Safe, but not for long. A woman approached, the one Celine had freed first, still clutching her daughter. The child couldn't have been more than 5, all wide eyes and tangled hair. "Thank you," the woman said. Her voice cracked on the words. "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Celine didn't know what to say. She'd killed 2 men last night, set a fire that probably destroyed evidence that could have brought down the syndicate through legal means, and put everyone here in danger. But looking at that little girl, she supposed some things were worth it. "You're not safe yet," Celine said. "We have people coming to take you somewhere secure, but until then, you need to stay quiet and stay hidden." "We will," the woman promised. "Anything. Just please don't let them take us back." "I won't," Celine said, and hoped it wasn't a lie. Tall grass emerged from the shadows, moving so silently Celine nearly jumped. "Riders," he said simply. 2 miles south. 6 men, maybe 7. Rowan stood immediately. "Ours or theirs?" "Can't tell yet, but they're moving fast." Celine's hand went to her gun. If it was syndicate hunters, they'd need to move the prisoners deeper into the canyon. If it was their own people... The riders appeared through the morning mist. Marcus in the lead, his scarred face grim. Behind him, Cole and 2 others Celine didn't know well. They looked like they'd ridden hard through the night. "We've got a problem," Marcus said, dismounting. "The transport's been moved up. Those wagons are leaving Coldwater Junction this morning, not tomorrow." Rowan cursed. "How do you know?" "We had someone watching the junction. Wendell, that clerk you talked to, sent word through back channels. The syndicate must have gotten spooked after last night. They're pushing the schedule up, trying to get the prisoners out before anyone else can interfere." "Where's Iris?" Celine asked. Where's the rest of the team? Already at the canyon, Cole said. Been there since last night. But if those wagons reach Broken Mesa in... He checked his watch. 4 hours, maybe less. We need to be in position. Rowan looked at the freed prisoners, then at Celine. She could see the calculation in his eyes. They couldn't take the prisoners with them to an ambush, but they couldn't leave them unprotected either. Tall grass, Rowan said. Can you get them to Silver Ridge? Take the back trails. Avoid main roads? Tallgrass nodded. It will take 2 days, but yes. Clara will hide them until this is over. Rowan pulled a folded paper from his vest. Give her this. It explains everything. What about the syndicate? One of the freedmen asked, fear sharp in his voice. If they find us, they won't, Tallgrass said with absolute certainty. I know these hills. I know places no white man has ever seen. You'll be safe. It wasn't much comfort, but it was all they had. The prisoners gathered what little they had, mostly just the clothes on their backs, and the desperate hope that this nightmare was finally ending. Celine watched them go, following Tallgrass into the trees like refugees from a war zone, which, she supposed, they were. We need to move, Marcus said. If we're not at the canyon before those wagons arrive, this whole thing falls apart. Rowan swung onto his horse. Then let's ride, Juan. They pushed the horses hard, harder than was smart, but there was no choice. 4 hours to cover 20 miles of rough terrain and get into position before the syndicate freight rolled through. It was tight, too tight. Celine rode beside Rowan, the wind whipping her hair back, her brother's coat flapping behind her. She thought about those prisoners in the wagons, locked in darkness, probably terrified, not knowing whether they were being shipped to a brothel or a mine or just killed outright once they were far enough from witnesses. She thought about her brother, how he'd fought back against Boone Rayner in that saloon, how that one moment of courage had cost him everything, how Silas had smiled while her brother screamed. You're thinking too much, Rowan said, glancing over at her. Is that possible? Celine asked. Before a fight? Yes. You start thinking about what could go wrong. You freeze when it matters. I learned that the hard way. How? Rowan was quiet for a moment. About a year after Emily died, I tracked down one of the men who'd been there when they killed her. Took me months to find him. He was hiding in a mining camp up north, going by a different name. I walked into his tent with a gun, ready to put a bullet in his skull. He paused. But then I started thinking about Emily, about what she'd want, about whether revenge would actually make me feel better. And while I was thinking, he pulled a knife and nearly gutted me. Only reason I'm alive is his hand slipped on the handle. What happened to him? I shot him, Rowan said simply. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. And I learned that when it comes down to it, thinking is what gets you killed. You act or you die. Celine nodded. It was harsh advice, but honest. And she'd learned the same lesson in that basement when Grady had come at her with that brand. You didn't think. You fought or you broke. The canyon came into view just before noon. Broken Mesa was aptly named, a long crack in the earth where some ancient geological violence had split the land in two. The walls rose 50 feet on either side, rust-red stone streaked with black. The floor was maybe 30 feet wide, just enough for wagons to pass through single file. It was a natural kill box, and Iris had positioned their people perfectly. Marcus led them up the north rim where Iris was waiting. She had dirt on her face and gunpowder under her fingernails, and her eyes glittered with something that might have been excitement or madness or both. About time, Iris said. I've got charges set at both ends of the canyon. Once the wagons are inside, I blow the exits. They'll be trapped. What about the prisoners? Celine asked. We've got shooters on both rims. Iris pointed to positions along the canyon walls, where Celine could now see people hidden behind rocks. First priority is taking out the guards and drivers. Once they're down, we get those wagons open. How many guards are we expecting? Rowan asked. Wendell's contact said 8 to 10, 4 wagons, so probably 2 guards per wagon plus drivers. Maybe a couple riders for security. Cole spat into the dust. We're outnumbered. We have the high ground, Marcus said, and surprised that counts for more than numbers. Celine walked to the edge and looked down into the canyon. It was quiet now, just wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. In a few hours, this place would be chaos. Blood on the rocks, screaming, fire. You ready for this? Beatrice appeared at her elbow. The woman had her rifle already loaded, 2 knives visible on her belt. She looked calm, which was more unnerving than if she'd looked scared. No, Celine said, but I'm doing it anyway. Beatrice smiled just a little. Good answer. People who say they're ready are usually lying to themselves. They took their positions along the rim. Celine crouched behind a boulder with a clear sight line down the canyon. Rowan was 20 feet to her right, Marcus beyond him. On the opposite rim, she could see Cole and 2 others nearly invisible against the rocks. And then they waited. Waiting before a fight was its own special kind of torture. Minutes stretched like hours. Every sound became significant. Was that hoofbeats or just wind? Was that dust rising in the distance or heat shimmer? Celine's hands started to sweat. She wiped them on her coat, checked her gun for the dozenth time, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. There, Rowan said softly. Celine looked where he was pointing. At first she saw nothing. Then, movement. A line of wagons emerging from the shimmer of heat on the eastern approach. 1, 2, 3, 4. Canvas covered, pulled by mules. Men on horseback flanking them. The syndicate freight train. Positions, Iris hissed from somewhere down the line. Celine sighted down her rifle. The wagons were moving slowly, wheels crunching over the rocky ground. She counted guards. 9 visible. Could be more inside the wagons or hidden in the canvas folds. The lead wagon entered the canyon, then the second, third, fourth. Iris waited until all 4 were inside the natural walls boxed in by stone. Then she raised her hand and brought it down. The world exploded. Charges at both ends of the canyon detonated simultaneously, bringing down tons of rock and debris. The sound was massive, overwhelming, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. The mules panicked, braying and trying to bolt, but there was nowhere to go. The wagons were trapped. Now! Marcus roared. Gunfire erupted from both rims. Celine aimed at a guard trying to control his spooked horse and pulled the trigger. The man jerked and fell. She worked the bolt, acquired another target, fired again. Around her, the others were doing the same, methodical and brutal. The syndicate guards tried to return fire, but they were caught in the worst possible position, trapped at the bottom of a canyon with shooters above them on both sides. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. One of the drivers made a run for it, abandoning his wagon and sprinting for the blocked exit. Cole's rifle cracked and the man went down hard, tumbling face first into the rocks. A guard managed to get behind one of the wagons, using it for cover. He was firing upward, bullets sparking off stone near Celine's head. She ducked, relocated, came up 20 feet away, and put 2 rounds through the canvas. The firing stopped. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 minutes. When the echoes of the last gunshot faded, 9 men lay dead or dying on the canyon floor. The mules were still panicking, tangled in their traces. Smoke drifted across the scene like fog. Clear! Iris shouted from the south rim. Clear! Marcus echoed. Celine stood on shaking legs and started down the slope. Others were descending as well, weapons ready in case anyone was playing dead. But the syndicate guards were thoroughly dead. No one faked that much blood. She reached the first wagon and pulled back the canvas. Inside, she found what she'd been expecting and dreading, cages. Makeshift cells built into the wagon beds, crammed with people. Women, mostly. A few teenage boys. They stared at her with hollow eyes, too scared or too broken to make a sound. It's okay, Celine said, her voice rough. We're getting you out. She climbed into the wagon and started working on the locks. They were cheap padlocks, easy to shoot off. The first one shattered with a single bullet. The cage door swung open. The prisoners didn't move. Come on, Celine urged. You're free. We're not with the syndicate. We're here to help. Finally, one woman, older, gray-haired, stood and stumbled out of the cage. Free? She whispered, like she didn't know the word. Free, Celine confirmed. Behind her, the others were opening the remaining wagons. Beatrice was helping people down, speaking softly in Spanish to a group of terrified women. Marcus had kicked open the last wagon and was staring at what he found inside with an expression of pure rage. Children, he said, his voice shaking. They've got children in here. Can't be more than 10 years old. Celine's stomach turned. She'd known the syndicate trafficked children. Everyone knew, but seeing it was different. 3 kids huddled in a cage barely big enough for one adult, filthy and wide-eyed with fear. Rowan appeared beside her, his face white with fury. "Get them out, all of them, and someone find water, food, anything." The rescued prisoners numbered 23 in total. They looked like they'd been through hell, which they had, but they were alive. And as the shock wore off and they realized they weren't being transferred to a worse fate, something like hope started to appear in their faces. Eris was already working on clearing the rockfall from the eastern exit. "We need to move," she said. "Whoever hired these guards will expect them to check in. When they don't, more will come." "How long do we have?" Rowan asked. "Hours at best. Maybe less." Celine looked at the 23 freed prisoners, at the 9 dead guards, at the evidence scattered across the canyon floor. Manifests in the wagons, shipping documents, names and destinations written in neat, bureaucratic hand. "We take the documents," she said. "Everything. Manifests, ledgers, anything with names or routes. This is proof. Real proof. The kind even a bought-off judge can't ignore." "And the prisoners?" Cole asked. "We split up," Rowan said. "Marcus, Beatrice, you take them north to Silver Ridge. Tallgrass should have the others there by now. Clara will hide everyone until this is over." "What about the rest of us?" Iris asked. Rowan looked at Celine. She knew what he was asking without words. They'd hit the transport, freed the prisoners, exposed the trafficking routes. But the head was still alive. Silas, Boone, Grady, they were still up in those hills, still running the operation. "We finish it," Celine said. "We go back to the ranch and end this permanently." "That's suicide," Beatrice said flatly. "They'll be ready for us now, fortified, armed, expecting an attack." "Probably," Celine agreed. "But if we don't finish them now, they rebuild. Find new routes, buy new officials, and in 6 months we're right back where we started. Except this time, they'll know we're coming." Marcus was nodding slowly. "She's right. Half measures don't work with people like the Rayners. You cut out the rot or it spreads." "How many of us are going?" Cole asked. Rowan looked around at their depleted group. "Anyone who wants to can leave. No judgment. You've all done more than anyone could ask." No one moved. These scarred survivors, these forgotten people who'd lost everything to the syndicate, they weren't leaving. Not yet. "All right then," Rowan said. "We rest here for an hour, tend wounds, eat, reload. Then we ride for the ranch. And this time, we don't leave until the syndicate is ash." But they buried the syndicate guards in a mass grave, which was more than the criminals deserved, but the only practical option. Leaving bodies to rot would attract attention they couldn't afford. Marcus said a few words, not prayers exactly, just an acknowledgement that death was death, even for evil men. The freed prisoners left with Marcus and Beatrice, moving north under the protection of armed escort. Celine watched them go and felt something twist in her chest. Those were the lucky ones. They'd survive this. But the people going back to the ranch? The odds weren't good. Iris distributed her remaining explosives. She had 3 more charges, each one enough to bring down a building if placed right. "Use them wisely," she said, "because after this, I'm out." Cole checked everyone's ammunition. They were running low. 2, maybe 3 reloads each. Against a fortified position with maybe 20 defenders, it wasn't encouraging math. "We're gonna die, aren't we?" one of the younger men asked. His name was Thomas, and he'd lost his sister to the syndicate 3 years ago. "Maybe," Rowan said honestly, "but we're taking them with us if we do." They rode through the afternoon, pushing tired horses over rough terrain. No one talked much. What was there to say? They were heading into what amounted to a frontal assault on a defended position with limited ammunition and no reinforcements. It was the kind of tactical situation military academies used as an example of what not to do. But sometimes you did it anyway, because the alternative was living with what you didn't do. The sun was starting to sink when they crested the ridge above the syndicate ranch. From this height, they could see smoke still rising from the barn. Celine's fire from last night was apparently still smoldering. The main lodge looked intact, but there was activity everywhere. Men moving with purpose, building barricades, positioning weapons. "They're expecting us," Iris observed. "Good," Celine said. "Let them be afraid for once." Rowan surveyed the scene with a tactician's eye. "The tunnel entrance is still our best way in. If we can get inside, we can hit them from below while they're focused on defending the perimeter. That tunnel's going to be guarded now, Cole pointed out. Probably sealed. Then we unseal it, Celine said. She turned to Iris. Can you blow the door? Can and will, Iris said with a grim smile. They left the horses hidden in a ravine and moved on foot through the gathering dusk. 7 of them now. Rowan, Celine, Iris, Cole, and 3 others whose names Celine had learned, but whose stories she didn't know. 7 people against an empire. The tunnel door was indeed sealed, barricaded from the inside with what looked like timber and sandbags. 2 guards stood watch, alert and nervous. I can take them, Cole whispered. Wait, Rowan said. He was looking at something else, a drainage culvert that ran from the main lodge down the hillside, probably for channeling rainwater. It was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, partially covered with an iron grate. That leads inside? Celine asked. If the ranch is built the way I think it is, yes. Wealthy operations like this always have drainage. Too much water pools in those underground chambers, you get flooding. You want us to crawl through a drainage pipe? One of the men asked incredulously. I want to get inside without alerting every guard in the territory, Rowan replied. They studied the culvert. It would be tight, miserable, probably full of things Celine didn't want to think about, but it would get them inside. I'll go first, Celine said. I know the layout below. Not alone, Rowan said immediately. Then you come second. But someone needs to stay up here and hit the front when we signal. Create confusion, split their attention. Iris cracked her knuckles. That's what explosives are for. You get inside, get into position. When you're ready, signal us. I'll blow something large and loud. They'll come running, and you hit them from behind. It wasn't a great plan, but it was a plan, which was more than they'd had 5 minutes ago. Celine approached the culvert. The grate came off with some effort, revealing a dark hole that smelled like wet stone and decay. She looked at Rowan. If I get stuck, you won't, Rowan said. But if I do, then I'll pull you out or die trying. Now stop stalling and get in there. Celine took a breath and slid into the culvert head first. It was worse than she'd imagined. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Water trickled along the bottom, cold and foul-smelling. She could hear things moving in the darkness ahead. Rats, probably, or worse. But she kept moving, army crawling through the dark, trying not to think about the tons of earth above her, or what would happen if the pipe collapsed. Behind her, she heard Rowan enter the culvert. Then came the sound of metal scraping on stone as he pulled the grate back into place, hiding their entry point. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. The pipe angled downward, deeper into the hillside. Celine's elbows were screaming, her back cramping from the confined space. Then ahead, she saw light. The pipe opened into one of the underground chambers. Celine emerged like she was being born, falling out of the culvert onto cold stone floor. Rowan followed a moment later, both of them soaked and filthy. They were in a storage room of some kind, crates stacked along the walls. No guards. But Celine could hear voices nearby, echoing through the tunnels. Supposed to check in 2 hours ago. Something's wrong. Silas is upstairs. Should we tell him? And say what? That we lost contact with the transport? He'll string us up. The voices moved away. Celine and Rowan waited until silence returned, then moved carefully into the main tunnel. The cells she'd opened last night were empty now, just blood and char marks from the fire. But there were other rooms, other passages. They moved deeper, checking each chamber. One room held ledgers, years' worth of trafficking records, names, payments, routes. Rowan started shoving them into a sack he'd brought. Evidence, he muttered. Even if we don't make it out, someone will find this. Another room held weapons, crates of rifles, ammunition, even dynamite. Celine grabbed what she could carry, extra rounds stuffing her pockets until they bulged. Then they found the last room, and Celine's breath caught. It was a trophy room in the sickest sense. Belongings taken from victims, photographs, personal items, and on the wall, burned into the wood like a brand, dozens of names, a memorial to the dead kept by their killers like hunting trophies. Celine scanned the names, and there, halfway down, she found it. Daniel Voss, her brother's name, marked in ash and memory. Celine, Rowan said softly, but she was already moving, her hand reaching up to touch the letters like they were sacred. They kept a record, she whispered. They killed him and kept a record. Like he was nothing. Like he was just another. Rage, white hot and total, flooded through her. All the grief she'd been holding back, all the fear and shame and broken pieces of herself, it crystallized into something pure and deadly. I'm going to kill them, Celine said. Her voice was calm, flat. All of them. Slowly. Good, Rowan said. And he meant it. They continued through the tunnels until they reached the stairs leading up to the main lodge. Voices above, clearer now. The sound of boots on wooden floors. Celine checked her gun. 6 rounds. Not enough. It would never be enough. Ready? Rowan asked. Celine thought about her brother, about Emily Mercer, about all the names burned into that wall, people who'd died screaming in this place, about the children they'd freed from those cages. Ready, she said. They climbed the stairs together, emerging into a hallway on the ground floor of the lodge. Expensive rugs, mounted animal heads, the trappings of wealth built on suffering. A guard rounded the corner and froze when he saw them, his mouth open to shout. Rowan's knife took him in the throat before any sound came out. They dragged the body into a closet and kept moving. The main hall was ahead. Celine could hear multiple voices now. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the syndicate leadership, celebrating something. Probably celebrating the transport leaving on time, Celine thought bitterly. They had no idea that transport was now a mass grave in a canyon, their prisoners freed and their operation exposed. She and Rowan positioned themselves at the entrance to the hall. Through the doorway, Celine could see them. Silas Rayner sitting at the head of a long table, his brother Boone beside him. 4 other men she didn't recognize, probably lieutenants, and standing by the fireplace, cleaning his fingernails with a knife, Grady Pike. The man who'd branded her, who'd beaten her brother, who'd smiled while she screamed. Celine's hand tightened on her gun until her knuckles went white. Signal, Iris, she whispered to Rowan. It's time. Rowan pulled a small mirror from his pocket and angled it to catch the lamplight, flashing it toward the window in a prearranged pattern. 3 short flashes, pause, 3 more. Outside, somewhere in the hills, Iris would see that signal, and then the world would burn. The explosion, when it came, shook the entire lodge. Iris had outdone herself. The blast tore through the front barricades with a roar like the end of the world, sending splinters and stone fragments through the evening air. Men started shouting immediately, chairs scraping as the syndicate leadership jumped to their feet. What the hell was that? Boone Rayner snarled, his hand going to the gun at his hip. Silas was already moving toward the window. We're under attack. Get everyone... That's when Celine and Rowan stepped into the doorway, guns raised. Nobody move, Celine said. The room froze. 7 men, caught flat-footed, staring at 2 people who by all rights should have been dead or running. Silas's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, shock, recognition, then something that looked almost like respect. Well, he said slowly, the little branded bird came back to the nest. I have to admit, I didn't expect that. You should have, Celine said. Her gun was trained on Silas's chest, steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. You killed my brother. Did you really think I'd just disappear? Grady Pike moved away from the fireplace, that knife still in his hand. Boss, that's the Voss girl, the one I marked, and that... His eyes narrowed at Rowan. That's Rowan Mercer, the cattleman. I know who he is, Silas said. His initial surprise was fading, replaced by the cold calculation that had kept him alive and powerful for 8 years. Mr. Mercer, I have to say, I'm disappointed. I thought you were a businessman. A man who understood how the world works. I understand exactly how it works, Rowan said. Men like you buy men like Marshall Draven. You hide behind legitimate enterprises while trafficking human beings. You kill anyone who gets in your way and call it business. That's right, Silas said. That's exactly how it works. And it's worked beautifully for years, so why would you throw away everything you've built to help some nobody girl with a grudge? Because my wife asked me to, Rowan said simply. Before you murdered her. The room went very still. Outside, more explosions echoed. Gunfire, screaming. Iris and the others were hitting the perimeter hard, keeping the guards occupied. Silas's face hardened. Emily Mercer. That meddling woman who couldn't leave well enough alone. She should have stuck to her charities and stayed out of business that didn't concern her. She made it her business, Rowan said, and now I'm making it mine. Boone laughed, an ugly sound. You're making it your business? You and what army? I count 2 of you against 7 of us, and outside my men are dealing with whoever's stupid enough to attack us. You walked into a death trap. Funny, Celine said. I was going to say the same thing about you. She pulled the trigger. The bullet took Boone in the shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed into the table, blood spreading across his shirt. The room erupted into chaos. One of the lieutenants went for his gun. Rowan shot him twice, center mass. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Another dove behind the table, coming up firing. His shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall near Celine's head. She returned fire, catching him in the leg. He went down screaming. Grady charged at her with that knife, moving fast for a big man. Celine twisted aside, but not quite fast enough. The blade scored across her ribs, slicing through her brother's coat and drawing blood. She brought her gun up, but Grady batted it aside, sending it skittering across the floor. They grappled, falling against a bookshelf. Books rained down around them. Grady's hands found her throat, squeezing. His face was inches from hers, and she could see the enjoyment in his eyes. He liked this. Liked hurting people. I'm gonna kill you slow, Grady breathed. Just like I killed your brother. Gonna make you... Celine drove her knee into his groin. Not elegant, not fancy, but effective. Grady's grip loosened. She shoved him back, grabbed a fireplace poker from the hearth, and swung it with everything she had. The iron connected with Grady's skull with a sound like a melon cracking. He staggered, blood pouring down his face. Celine hit him again. And again. All the rage, all the nightmares, all the time she'd woken up screaming, she put it all into those blows. Grady fell to his knees, then forward onto his face. He didn't get up. Across the room, Rowan had his hands full. 2 men had rushed him simultaneously. He'd dropped one with a shot to the chest, but the other had tackled him, and now they were fighting on the ground for control of Rowan's gun. The weapon fired once, the bullet going into the ceiling. Then again, this time hitting the man fighting him. The lieutenant went limp. Rowan shoved the body aside and stood, breathing hard. His lip was split, blood running down his chin. He looked around the room at the carnage. 4 men down, Grady possibly dead, Boone bleeding heavily from his shoulder wound, and Silas Rayner standing by the window with a gun in his hand, aimed at Celine. Everybody stop, Silas said calmly. Rowan froze, his own weapon only halfway raised. Celine stood over Grady's body, the bloody poker still in her hand, and met Silas's eyes. You've made your point, Silas said. You hit our transport, freed the prisoners, killed my brother's men, destroyed months of work. Congratulations, you've won this round. He smiled, and it was the same smile he'd worn when he'd made her watch her brother die. But here's the problem. Even if you kill me, kill all of us, the syndicate doesn't end. We have operations in 4 territories, connections in the capital, judges, marshals, freight companies, all bought and paid for. You cut off 1 head, 3 more grow back. That's a nice speech, Celine said, but you're still going to die. Maybe, Silas agreed. But so is Mercer here, and you, and everyone who helped you, because even if you walk out of this room, my men will hunt you down. Your families, your friends, everyone you've ever cared about. That's how we survive. That's how we always survive. Outside, the sounds of battle were intensifying. More explosions. The crackle of flames. Something was burning. Celine could smell smoke. Your men are a little busy right now, Rowan said. And as for the rest of your empire, we found your ledgers. Every transaction, every name, every route. It's all documented. By tomorrow, copies will be in the hands of the territorial governor, the federal marshal, and 3 newspapers. You're finished. For the first time, Silas's composure cracked. You're bluffing. Am I? Rowan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded ledger page. This is just 1 page from your records. 6 years of trafficking routes using my freight contracts as cover. Names include Marshal Draven, Judge Hammond, Senator Carlisle's chief of staff. Want me to keep reading? Silas's gun hand wavered. Just for a second, but Celine saw it. She threw the fireplace poker. It wasn't a good throw. The poker tumbled end over end, more distraction than weapon. But it was enough. Silas flinched, his gun tracking toward the movement, and in that half second of distraction, Rowan fired. The shot hit Silas in the chest, just left of center. The syndicate leader staggered back against the window, surprise etched across his face. His gun fell from nerveless fingers. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at Celine. "You should have run," he whispered, "when you had the chance." "So should you," Celine said. Silas Rayner, architect of an empire built on suffering, slid down the wall and died on an expensive rug in his stolen mansion. Celine stood there for a moment, breathing hard, staring at the body. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. Thought it would feel different, that there'd be satisfaction or relief, or at least some sense of closure. Instead, she just felt tired. "Celine," Rowan said urgently, "we need to move. This place is burning." She looked around and realized he was right. Smoke was pouring in under the door. The explosions had started fires, and the old wooden structure was going up fast. Already the heat was becoming intense. Boone was still alive, clutching his shoulder wound and staring at his brother's body with something like incomprehension. One of the other lieutenants was conscious but badly wounded, dragging himself toward the door. Grady wasn't moving at all. "Leave them," Celine said. She picked up her gun from where it had fallen. "Let the fire take them." "Celine, they couldn't. They burned my brother," Celine said flatly. "They tortured him, killed him, and burned his body in an unmarked grave. They deserve the same." Rowan looked like he wanted to argue. But then another explosion rocked the building and a section of ceiling collapsed in the corner, sending up a shower of sparks. "All right," he said, "but we go now." They ran. The hallway was an inferno. Flames licked up the walls, feeding on expensive wallpaper and 100-year-old timber. The smoke was thick enough to cut, burning Celine's lungs with every breath. She pulled her brother's coat up over her mouth and pushed forward, following Rowan toward what she hoped was an exit. Behind them, she heard screaming. Boone, probably, or the wounded lieutenant. She didn't look back. They burst through a side door into the evening air, gasping. The entire ranch was chaos. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching for the sky. Bodies lay scattered across the yard, syndicate guards taken down by Iris's team. She could see Cole and the others still fighting near the corrals, pinned down by gunfire from the bunkhouse. "There!" Rowan pointed toward the tree line where they'd left the horses. Iris was there, waving them over, her face blackened with soot and gunpowder. They ran, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. A guard appeared from the smokehouse, rifle raised. Celine shot him without breaking stride. They hit the tree line and kept going, branches tearing at their clothes. The horses were restless, eyes rolling white at the smoke and gunfire. Celine hauled herself into the saddle, her wounded ribs screaming in protest. Rowan was already mounted, and Iris swung up onto her horse with practiced ease. "Cole!" Rowan shouted back toward the ranch. "Fall back!" Through the smoke, Celine saw Cole and the others disengage, running for the trees. They'd almost made it when a guard emerged from the bunkhouse with a rifle. He fired. Thomas, the young man who'd lost his sister, stumbled and fell. Cole turned back, grabbed Thomas under the arms, and dragged him the last few yards into cover. But Thomas wasn't moving anymore. The shot had taken him in the back, and there was too much blood. "He's gone," Cole said, his voice cracking. "He's gone." They couldn't stay. The syndicate guards were regrouping, and more would be coming. Rowan gave the order and they rode, leaving Thomas's body behind, leaving the burning ranch behind, leaving everything behind except the ledgers and Rowan's saddlebags, and the knowledge that they'd struck a blow the syndicate wouldn't recover from. They rode through the night, not stopping until they were miles away, and the glow of the burning ranch had faded behind the hills. Finally, in a sheltered canyon near a stream, they dismounted. 5 of them left now. They'd started with 11. Lost Marcus and Beatrice to escort duty. Lost Thomas to a bullet in the back. Lost who knew how many years off their lives from the stress and smoke and violence. But the syndicate ranch was ashes. Silas was dead. Boone probably was too by now, along with Grady and the others. The trafficking operation was exposed, the ledgers documenting everything in damning detail. Iris started a small fire. They sat around it, not talking much. What was there to say? They'd won, technically, but victory tasted like smoke and blood. Rowan was examining the ledgers by firelight, his face grave. This is worse than I thought, he said. The syndicate wasn't just operating in this territory. They had connections across 6 states, shipping routes, distribution networks, buyers. It's enormous. Will the ledgers be enough? Cole asked. To bring them all down? Maybe, if we can get them to people who aren't already bought off. Rowan closed the ledger. I have contacts in the capital, journalists who owe me favors, federal marshals who are actually honest. It'll take time, but we can dismantle this. And the prisoners? Celine asked. The ones we freed? Marcus should have them at Silver Ridge by now, Rowan said. Claire will hide them, get them fed and clothed. After that, he shrugged. After that, we figure out how to give them their lives back, if that's even possible. Celine thought about the woman with the child, about the gray-haired woman who'd whispered free like she didn't know the word, about the 3 children in that cage and all the others they hadn't saved because they'd been shipped east before tonight. We didn't get all of them, she said quietly. No, Rowan agreed. We didn't, but we got some. And we stopped more from being taken. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. It never is, Iris said. She was cleaning her gun, methodical despite her exhausted. That's the thing about fighting evil. You can't ever really win. You just fight your piece of it and hope someone else fights theirs. They sat in silence after that. The fire burned down to embers. Overhead, stars came out, cold and distant and uncaring. Celine touched the brand on her shoulder through her ruined coat. The scar tissue was raised, permanent. She'd carry Silas Rayner's mark for the rest of her life, but she'd also carry the knowledge that she'd watched him die, that she'd stood over his body and felt nothing but tired satisfaction. Was that justice? She didn't know. Probably not. Justice was supposed to come through courts and laws and proper channels. What they'd done tonight was vengeance, pure and simple, brutal and bloody, and entirely outside the bounds of civilized society. But civilized society had failed. The courts were bought. The laws were ignored. And sometimes, Celine thought, sometimes the only thing that worked was matching violence with violence, corruption with reckoning, evil with the kind of focused rage that burned empires to the ground. What happens now? Cole asked. Assuming we survive the next few days? Rowan was quiet for a long moment. I rebuild, he said finally. Not the syndicate's operations. Those stay buried, but the territory itself. Use my money to create legitimate freight routes, safe transport, opportunities for people to make honest livings. Fund schools, hospitals, things Emily would have wanted. He looked at Celine. What about you? Celine didn't answer right away. She'd spent so long focused on revenge that she hadn't thought much beyond it. What did you do when the thing driving you was finally gone? When the monster was dead and all that remained was the empty space where your purpose used to be? I don't know, she said honestly. Find my brother's body, I suppose. Give him a proper burial. After that, she shrugged. I'll figure it out. You could stay, Rowan said, at Silver Ridge. Help with the survivors, help rebuild. You've got skills, and you understand what these people have been through better than anyone. Maybe, Celine said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and right now, that was the best she could manage. They took turns on watch that night. When it was Celine's turn, she stood at the edge of the canyon and looked back toward where the ranch had been. She couldn't see the flames anymore, but she could smell the smoke on the wind. Somewhere in those ashes was Grady Pike, the man who'd branded her. Boone Rayner, who'd started all this with his wandering hands in a saloon. Silas Rayner, the architect of an empire built on suffering. They were gone now, reduced to carbon and memory. But how many more were out there? How many other syndicate operations in other territories running the same business under different names? The ledgers suggested dozens, maybe hundreds. Rowan was right. They'd won this battle. But the war? The war was far from over. Still, they'd made a dent. Freed 40-some prisoners who would have otherwise disappeared into a nightmare they'd never wake from. Destroyed one major hub of the trafficking network. Exposed enough evidence to bring down judges and marshals and politicians who'd thought they were untouchable. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes, something was all you could manage. They reached Silver Ridge 3 days later, exhausted and wounded but alive. Clara met them at the main house, took one look at their condition, and immediately went into nurse mode. She cleaned wounds, bandaged injuries, forced food and water into them despite their protests that they weren't hungry. The freed prisoners were there, 46 of them total, 23 from the canyon, 23 from the ranch tunnels, all crowded into the ranch's various buildings. They looked better than they had, fed, clean, wearing clothes that actually fit. But their eyes still held that hollow look, that haunted quality of people who'd seen things no one should have to see. Marcus and Beatrice had made it back safely, though Marcus had taken a bullet in the leg during a skirmish with syndicate riders who'd tried to intercept them. He'd ride with a limp from now on, but he'd live. Tall Grass had gotten his group through without incident, using trails that Celine suspected weren't on any map. That night, Rowan gathered everyone in the main dining room. It was crowded. Survivors, rescuers, ranch hands who'd been kept in the dark but were now being brought into confidence. Clara had prepared a meal, simple but substantial. For many of the freed prisoners, it was probably the first real meal they'd had in weeks. Rowan stood at the head of the table, looking more worn than Celine had ever seen him. The past week had aged him. Gray showed more prominently in his hair. Lines had deepened around his eyes. But his voice was steady when he spoke. I want to start by saying that what we did, what all of us did together, was illegal, violent, outside the bounds of law and order. If any of you want to leave, to distance yourselves from this, I'll understand. I'll even help you relocate, give you money to start over somewhere else. He paused. But I hope you'll stay, because this is just the beginning. Murmurs around the table. Celine watched faces, saw confusion, hope, fear, determination. The syndicate's reach extended far beyond this territory, Rowan continued. The ledgers we recovered document operations in 6 states, hundreds of victims, dozens of corrupt officials. Taking down one ranch, even killing the Rayner brothers, isn't enough. The network has to be dismantled completely. How? Someone asked. You said it yourself. They've got judges, marshals, politicians. Who's going to bring them down? We are, Rowan said. Not with guns this time. With evidence, with testimony, with pressure applied in the right places to the right people. He gestured to the stack of ledgers on the sideboard. I'm sending copies of these to every honest official I know, to newspapers, to federal marshals, to the territorial governor. We're going to expose the entire network, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly how deep the corruption goes. They'll come after you, Iris said. After all of us. You think the syndicate will just let you destroy them without fighting back? I'm counting on it, Rowan said. Because when they come after us, they'll be making themselves visible. Right now they operate in shadows. We're going to drag them into the light. It was bold. Possibly suicidal. But then that seemed to be their specialty. What about us? The gray-haired woman from the wagon asked. The ones who were prisoners? What happens to us? Rowan's expression softened. You stay here as long as you need to. Silver Ridge has room, has resources. When you're ready, I'll help you get wherever you want to go, back to your families if you have them, or somewhere new if you don't. Whatever you need. Why? Another woman asked. Why would you do this for us? You don't know us. Rowan glanced at Emily's photograph on the mantel. Because someone I loved tried to help people like you, and it got her killed. This is me keeping a promise, and because he looked around at all of them. Because no one should have to go through what you went through, and if I can use my money, my resources, my privilege to make sure fewer people do, then that's what I'm going to do. It wasn't a stirring speech. Rowan wasn't that kind of man, but it was honest, and that counted for more. After dinner, Celine found herself on the front porch with Clara. The older woman handed her coffee, real coffee, not the burnt chicory substitute most people out here drank, and they sat in silence for a while. You're thinking about leaving, Clara said. It wasn't a question. How'd you know? You've got that look. Same one Emily had near the end. Like you're already saying goodbye to things. Celine sipped her coffee. It was good, rich, and strong. I don't belong here. This is Rowan's place, his fight now. The shooting part is over. What comes next, the legal battles, the politics, the rebuilding, that's not something I'm good at. What are you good at? Clara asked. Killing people, apparently, Celine said bitterly. That's not all you are. You freed 46 people, exposed a trafficking network, gave those survivors a chance they never would have had otherwise. That's worth something. Maybe, Celine said. But I'm still just angry. The Rainers are dead, the ranch is burned, and I'm still angry. At the syndicate, at the world, at myself for not being there when my brother needed me. I don't know how to stop being angry. Clara was quiet for a moment. Emily used to say something. She'd say, anger is a tool, not a home. You use it to tear down what's wrong, but you can't live there. Eventually, you have to build something new. Sounds like her, Celine said. She'd never met Emily Mercer, but she felt like she knew the woman. From Rowan's stories, from Clara's memory. From the photograph that watched over them all like a benevolent ghost. Stay a while longer, Clara suggested. Not forever if you don't want to, but long enough to figure out what you're building next. You've earned that much. Celine didn't answer, but she didn't argue either. And for now, that was enough. Inside, through the lit windows, she could see the survivors gathering around Rowan as he explained his plans. Could see Marcus and Beatrice comparing scars. Could see the woman with the child, the girl finally asleep in her arms, looking peaceful for the first time. They'd done that. This ragtag group of scarred survivors and one wealthy rancher with a promise to keep. They'd fought an empire and won. Not completely, not forever, but for now. And sometimes, Celine thought, now was all you could ask for. 3 weeks after the ranch burned, Celine stood at the edge of an unmarked field 2 miles from where the syndicate headquarters used to be and watched Marcus dig. The ground was hard, baked by summer sun, and stubborn in the way frontier dirt always was. Marcus worked methodically, his injured leg propped at an angle that wouldn't aggravate the wound. Beside him, Cole worked a second shovel, both men sweating despite the morning cool. They'd found the location through one of the freed prisoners, a man named William, who'd been forced to help bury bodies before his own failed escape attempt landed him in a cell. He'd drawn them a map from memory, marking the field with an X like some grim treasure hunt. Here, Marcus said, his shovel hitting something that wasn't dirt. I've got something. Celine's stomach clenched. She'd prepared herself for this moment, or thought she had, but now that it was here, she found her legs wouldn't move. Rowan appeared at her side. He'd insisted on coming despite Celine telling him he didn't need to. You want me to look first? He asked quietly. She shook her head. No, I need to see. They approached the shallow grave together. Marcus and Cole had cleared enough dirt to reveal fabric. A shirt, torn and stained, but recognizable. Celine had seen her brother wear that shirt 100 times. He'd bought it in Kansas City 2 years ago, been proud of it because it had real buttons instead of ties. It's him, she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. That's Daniel! They dug carefully after that, treating the remains with a respect they hadn't earned in death. When they finally had him free, Marcus wrapped everything in clean canvas. There wasn't much left. Bones, mostly. Fragments of clothing, a belt buckle Daniel had won in a card game. But it was enough. Celine knelt beside the wrapped bundle and put her hand on it. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry it took this long. But I got them, Danny. I got every single one of them. The wind picked up, stirring dust across the field. Somewhere, a hawk cried out, high and lonesome. Celine stayed kneeling until her knees ached and her eyes were dry. All the tears she had already spent in the weeks before. Where do you want to bury him? Rowan asked. Celine had thought about this. There's a hill on the north side of Silver Ridge. Clara said it catches the sunrise. Can we use that? It's yours if you want it, Rowan said. They buried Daniel Voss the next day in a proper grave with a proper marker. Clara had organized everything with the quiet efficiency she brought to all tasks. The stone was simple granite with his name and dates and a line Celine had chosen. He stood up when it mattered. All the survivors came. The freed prisoners, the fighters who'd survived the assault, ranch hands who'd never met Daniel but understood what his death had meant. They stood in silence while Marcus said a few words about courage and sacrifice, and the cost of doing right in a world gone wrong. Celine didn't speak. She just stood there in her brother's coat, one hand on the grave marker, and tried to figure out how to say goodbye to someone who'd been dead for months, but who she was only now letting go of. After everyone else had left, she stayed. The sun climbed higher, hot on her shoulders. She traced the letters of Daniel's name with her finger. I don't know what happens now, she told the stone. The people who killed you are dead. The empire they built is falling apart, but I'm still here, and I don't know what to do with that. She paused. You always knew what you wanted. You wanted to work the mines, make enough money to buy land, build something that mattered. You had plans. I just followed you around and pretended I had plans too. The stone didn't answer, but then she hadn't expected it to. Clara thinks I should stay here, help Rowan with the survivors, with the rebuilding. Maybe she's right. Maybe that's what you'd want. Celine wiped her eyes, frustrated with herself. I'm still so angry, Danny. Even with them dead, I'm still angry. Does that ever go away? A shadow fell across the grave. Celine turned to find one of the freed women standing there. The gray-haired one who'd been first out of the cells. Her name was Margaret, and she'd been a prisoner for 8 months before Celine freed her. I'm sorry, Margaret said. I don't mean to intrude. I just wanted to say what you did, freeing us. It mattered. It matters. And your brother, whatever he was like, I think he'd be proud. You didn't know him, Celine said, not unkindly. No, Margaret agreed. But I know you, and anyone who raised someone brave enough to walk into hell for strangers, well, that person must have been something special. After Margaret left, Celine sat by the grave until the sun started to sink. Then she stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and walked back toward the main house. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was something, a line drawn between the past and whatever came next. The territorial governor arrived at Silver Ridge a week later with an escort of federal marshals and a journalist from the Kansas City Star. Governor Harrison Webb was a compact man in his 60s, all sharp eyes and sharper questions. He'd been elected on an anti-corruption platform, but had been largely ineffective until Rowan's evidence landed on his desk. Now he had ammunition, and he was using it. They met in Rowan's study, the room crowded with people. The governor, 3 marshals, the journalist, Rowan, Celine, and Iris. Marcus stood guard outside, not trusting anyone in a uniform regardless of their proclaimed allegiance. Mr. Mercer, Governor Webb said, settling into a chair with a briefcase full of documents, I've reviewed the ledgers you sent. I've interviewed witnesses. I've investigated the claims. He paused. This is the most extensive corruption case I've seen in 30 years of public service, and it's going to tear this territory apart when it goes public. Good, Rowan said flatly. It should have been torn apart years ago. I don't disagree, but I need you to understand what's coming. 6 judges will be indicted, 14 territorial marshals, 24 local sheriffs and deputies, business owners, freight companies, land office officials. The syndicate's reach was deeper than even I suspected. The journalist, a thin woman named Patricia Green, was taking notes. Mr. Mercer, is it true you funded this entire operation yourself? The investigation, the rescue, the assault on the syndicate ranch? I provided resources, Rowan said carefully. I didn't do anything alone. But your money made it possible, Green pressed. Without your wealth, the syndicate would still be operating. Without survivors willing to risk their lives to testify, none of this would matter, Rowan countered. He gestured to Celine. Miss Voss spent 2 weeks in syndicate captivity. She watched them murder her brother. She's the one who had the courage to go back, to face them again. My money bought supplies and horses. Her courage bought justice. Green turned to Celine. Miss Voss, can you tell me what it was like, being held prisoner? Celine's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. No, but the public needs to— I don't care what the public needs, Celine said. Her voice was quiet but hard as granite. You want to write about corruption, about judges taking bribes and marshals looking the other way? Fine, write that. But my story is an entertainment. It's not a commodity for people to consume with their morning coffee. It's mine. Green looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Celine's face made her close her notebook instead. Governor Webb cleared his throat. We'll need testimony from the freed prisoners, from those who participated in the rescue. This will go to trial, multiple trials, and the defense attorneys will be brutal. They'll try to discredit everyone involved. Let them try, Iris said. She'd been quiet until now, just listening. I've got burns from your syndicate's operations. Marcus has a bullet in his leg. We've got 46 people who are locked in cages, and we've got ledgers with names and dates and amounts. Let the lawyers explain that away. One of the federal marshals, a lean man named Carter, spoke up. There's another issue. Some of the syndicate's operations are still active. smaller cells in other territories. They've heard what happened here, and they're either shutting down or going deeper underground. We need to move fast if we're going to catch them. Then move fast, Rowan said. I'll provide whatever resources you need. Money for investigations, safe houses for witnesses, transportation, whatever it takes. This could bankrupt you, the governor warned. The legal fees alone, then I'll be bankrupt, Rowan said simply. Money is replaceable. Those people's lives aren't. The meeting continued for hours, covering logistics and legal strategy and the complex dance of bringing down an empire through the courts instead of through bullets. By the end, Celine's head was pounding and she needed air. She found Marcus on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and red. You all right? He asked. Tired, Celine said. Tired of talking about it, thinking about it, living it. I want it to be over. It's not going to be over for a long time, Marcus said. Trials take years, appeals even longer. And even after all that, there'll still be people out there doing the same things under different names. I know, Celine said. That's what makes me tired. They sat in silence for a while. Then Marcus said, You ever think about what you would have done if none of this had happened? If your brother was still alive, if you'd made it to the mining camps like you planned? Celine had to think about it. That life felt so distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. I don't know. Found work, I suppose. Cooking, cleaning, whatever was available. Daniel would have worked the mines until he saved enough to buy land. We would have built something small and simple and probably been happy. You could still do that, Marcus said. Once this is done, take some of Mercer's money, and don't tell me he won't give it to you because he will, and go somewhere quiet. Build that simple life. Could you? Celine asked. After everything we've seen, everything we've done, could you just go be quiet and simple? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. No, I don't think I could. Me either, Celine said. Tag. The trials began 3 months later and lasted the better part of a year. Celine testified twice. Once in the case against Marshal Cole Draven, describing how he'd been in the syndicate's pocket, how he'd ignored crimes and warned them when investigations got too close. The second time was in the case against Judge Hammond, a fat man with expensive suits who'd dismissed every trafficking case brought before him for 6 years. Both times, the defense attorneys tried to tear her apart. They called her a liar, a vindictive woman with an axe to grind. They suggested she'd fabricated evidence. They implied she'd been complicit in her own captivity. They made her relive every moment of her imprisonment in excruciating detail, asking invasive questions designed to humiliate and discredit her. Celine sat in the witness box and answered every question with the same flat, factual tone. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just told the truth over and over, until even the defense attorneys looked uncomfortable. Draven was convicted. 15 years. Hammond got 20. Across the territory, similar verdicts rolled in. Some of the corrupt officials fled before they could be arrested. Others killed themselves. A few fought and lost. But one by one, the pieces of the syndicate's network were dismantled. The newspapers called it the trial of the century. Patricia Green wrote a series of articles that won awards and sparked reform movements in 3 states. The governor used the momentum to push through anti-corruption legislation and establish an independent oversight board for law enforcement. For the survivors, it was exhausting. Every trial meant reliving trauma. Every newspaper article meant being reminded of what they'd lost. But they showed up anyway, testified anyway, because the alternative was letting the guilty walk free. Through it all, Rowan kept his promise. He funded safe houses for witnesses, paid for lawyers, provided security when threats came, and they did come. His fortune took a beating. Some business associates cut ties, afraid of being associated with the scandal. Some contracts were canceled. Some investments fell through. But Rowan didn't seem to care. He'd found a purpose beyond accumulating wealth, and it suited him better than being a cattle baron ever had. One evening, almost a year after the ranch burned, Celine found him in his study staring at Emily's photograph. Talking to her again? Celine asked. Always, Rowan said. Though I think I'm finally saying things she'd want to hear. Like what? Like how we've helped establish 3 safe houses for trafficking survivors. How the territorial legislature passed new laws, making it easier to prosecute traffickers. How 46 people are alive and building new lives because we refuse to look away. He turned to face Celine. Like how I finally understand what she was trying to tell me. That money is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it. She'd be proud, Celine said. Maybe, Rowan said. Or maybe she'd be frustrated it took me this long to figure it out. He smiled, sad but genuine. What about you? Are you proud? Celine thought about it. Proud seemed like the wrong word. She'd killed people, burned buildings, broken laws. She'd caused pain, even if it was to people who deserved it. But she'd also freed prisoners, exposed corruption, given her brother something resembling justice. I'm not sure proud is what I feel, she said finally, but I'm not ashamed either. And that's something. It's more than something, Rowan said. It's everything. Spring came, as it always did, indifferent to human drama. The survivors began to scatter. Some went back to families they'd been torn from. Others stayed in the territory, finding work and building new lives. A few stayed at Silver Ridge, helping Clara run what was becoming less a cattle ranch and more a refuge for people with nowhere else to go. Margaret, the gray-haired woman, opened a small school in a town 50 miles east. She wrote to Celine occasionally, letters full of hope and hard-won optimism. Beatrice went west, heard she'd started working with another group fighting trafficking in California. Marcus stayed at Silver Ridge, his injured leg making ranch work difficult, but his skills as a protector still valuable. Iris disappeared one day without a word. Celine found a note on her pillow. Gone to blow up something else. Don't wait up. It was so perfectly Iris that Celine actually laughed. And Celine herself? She stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she'd finally found something worth staying for. Rowan had been right, helping survivors, giving them resources and hope and a path forward. It didn't erase the anger, but it gave the anger somewhere to go that wasn't destructive. It turned rage into purpose, and purpose into something that looked almost like peace. She would never be the person she'd been before the syndicate. That Celine was gone, killed in a basement alongside her brother. But maybe that was all right. Maybe you weren't supposed to be the same person after surviving hell. Maybe the point was to become someone who could help others survive it too. One morning in late April, Celine walked out to her brother's grave carrying a small sapling. It was a wild plum tree, the kind that grew in impossible places on the frontier, the kind that took root in hard ground and bloomed anyway. She dug a hole beside the grave marker and planted the tree carefully, packing dirt around its roots. It probably wouldn't survive. The soil was poor, the location exposed, but maybe, with luck and stubbornness, it would take hold. I'm staying, Danny, she told the stone. I'm going to help Rowan with the refuge. Help people who went through what we did. It's not the life we planned, but it's the life I've got. I think you'd understand that. The morning was clear and cool, the kind of day that made you believe in new beginnings even when you knew better. Celine sat beside the grave for a while, one hand on the newly planted tree, and let herself be still. Clara found her there an hour later. Rowan's looking for you. There's a family just arrived, mother and 2 children. They were trafficked from St. Louis, escaped during transport. They need shelter. Celine stood, brushed dirt from her hands, and looked one last time at her brother's grave. The little plum tree stood thin and fragile in the morning light, impossibly alive. I'm coming, she said. She followed Clara down the hill toward the main house, where Rowan was already organizing rooms and resources, where survivors were helping new arrivals, sharing hard-won wisdom about how to keep breathing when breathing hurt, where wealth was finally being used not to build empires, but to rebuild people. It wasn't perfect. The work was hard and the progress slow. Some days Celine still woke up angry, still felt the phantom pain of the brand on her shoulder. Some days she wondered if anything they were doing actually mattered in a world that seemed designed to crush people like the ones they were trying to save. But then she'd see a child laugh for the first time in months, or watch a woman who'd been certain she'd die in captivity plan a future, or receive a letter from someone they'd freed telling her they'd found work or family or just a reason to keep going. And on those days, Celine understood something important. Revenge had its place. The Rayner brothers needed to die, and she didn't regret killing them. But revenge wasn't a foundation. You couldn't build a life on it. All it did was clear the ground so something else could grow. What grew in that cleared ground, that was the real work. The hard work. The work that never ended but also never stopped mattering. Years passed. The trials concluded. The syndicate's network was broken, though Celine knew that somewhere, someone was probably already building something similar. That was the nature of evil. It adapted, evolved, found new forms. But so did good. The refuge at Silver Ridge expanded. Other safe houses opened in other territories. Laws changed. Awareness grew. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was better. And better was worth fighting for. The wild plum tree, against all odds, survived. Each spring it bloomed, small white flowers that lasted only a few weeks before falling like snow. But while they lasted, they were beautiful. Proof that even in hard ground, with poor soil and exposure to wind and weather, life could take root. Life could persist. Celine visited the grave less often as time went on. Not because she forgot Daniel, but because she no longer needed to stand there to feel connected to him. He was in her brother's coat, which she still wore on cold days, in the stories she told about him, in the way she'd learned to stand up when it mattered, even when standing up meant risking everything. One spring morning, 15 years after she'd planted it, Celine brought her niece to see the tree in full bloom. The girl was 6, daughter of one of the survivors they'd freed in the canyon. She ran ahead, laughing, reaching for the low-hanging flowers. "Can I pick one?" the girl asked. "Just one," Celine said. The girl selected a bloom carefully, cradling it in her small hands like something precious. "It's pretty. What's it called?" "It's a wild plum," Celine said. "It grows in places where nothing else will. Your mama lived somewhere like that once. Somewhere hard and terrible. But she survived, and she made sure you'd have a better life than she did." The girl looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are you a survivor too?" Celine considered the question. Was she? She'd survived the syndicate, survived her brother's death, survived her own rage and grief. But more than that, she'd built something after. Not alone, never alone, but with the help of people who understood that surviving wasn't enough. You had to turn survival into living. "Yes," Celine said finally. "I'm a survivor. And so are you, even though you're too young to remember what we survived." They stood under the blooming tree, the girl examining her flower while Celine looked out at the valley. Silver Ridge spread below them, no longer just a wealthy man's ranch, but a place where broken people came to mend, where the privileged and the damaged worked side by side, slowly building something that might actually last. Rowan emerged from the main house, his hair fully gray now, walking with a slight limp from old injuries, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been 15 years ago. Unburdened by the wealth he'd hoarded when hoarding was all he knew how to do. He climbed the hill and stood beside Celine, both of them looking at the tree. "Emily would have liked this," he said quietly. "Yes," Celine agreed. She would have. They stood in silence, 3 generations united by trauma and hope, and the stubborn refusal to let evil have the last word. The wind picked up, shaking blossoms from the tree. They fell like blessings around them, proof that even in the hardest ground, beauty could take root and persist. And in that moment, Celine understood what Clara had tried to tell her all those years ago. Anger was a tool, not a home. You used it to tear down what needed tearing down. But after the tearing came the building, and building took courage of a different kind, the courage to hope, to trust, to believe that broken things could mend. The brand on her shoulder would never fade. The memories would never entirely lose their sharp edges. But she'd learned to carry them without being crushed. She'd learned that justice was more than revenge, that wealth meant nothing without purpose, and that the best way to honor the dead was to fight for the living. Down in the valley, someone was ringing the bell for the midday meal. New arrivals would be there, frightened and hurt, needing food and shelter and the kind of help that money could buy but only survivors could truly provide. The work would continue. It always did. But for now, Celine stood beneath her brother's tree and let herself be at peace, not because everything was fixed, it never would be, but because she'd learned that peace wasn't the absence of pain, it was the presence of purpose, and she'd found hers in the hardest place imaginable, among people who'd suffered as she had and refused to let that suffering be the end of their story. The wild plum bloomed every spring, reliable as sunrise, and every spring Celine was there to see it, bearing witness to small miracles and quiet persistence. Proof that fortune might build empires, but courage, stubborn, scarred, imperfect courage, was what changed the world.